So we have a sense of what makes a bad presentation. We've all sat through them, unfortunately. I actually suspect that we've all actually given bad presentations too, or at least presentations that have not great aspects in them. I think what's interesting that in doing research for this talk, I actually ran across, there are tons of people who write these kind of tongue-in-cheek booklets about how to give a bad presentation. My favorite was by Richard Smith, who is, or was at the time, the editor of the British Medical Journal, and he has an entire kind of booklet on what you need to do to give a bad presentation, and he starts with preparation. So how to prepare for a bad presentation, he says, forget it, just don't prepare at all. Walk into the room and let whatever comes out of your mouth come out. So you've been told you're going to speak to Italians, make sure you speak only in German. You're speaking to 15-year-olds, make sure you make a presentation so complex that only, not even perhaps, Nobel Prize winning scientists would be able to understand it, right? And of course, the last one, make sure that your presentation is 20 minutes too long. Just keep talking. Everybody hates presenters who go on too long. Smith also gives us some ideas about how to prepare visual aids that are bad, and interestingly enough, they follow right along with what we've heard already. Maybe you should use some videos that are long, audio that people can't hear. When you choose to use PowerPoint, you decide to use every feature of PowerPoint, animation, sound, websites, and of course you're going to put a ton of information on every slide, right? So that you get as much into the teeny tiny space of one slide as you can. Hi, come on in. And what about delivery? We actually hit on delivery as well. The presenter who speaks like this. The essence of a bad presentation is the boring presenter. You should never actually look at your audience. Keep your, keep your presentation in front of your face. Mumble your presentation and preferably read it. So here you are. This is you and your audience and your bad presentation. Notice that even you are bored with your bad presentation, right? Even you are falling asleep at this point. And I love that this graph, even though this isn't, I mean, actually this is not a bad visual aid because you can see some pretty distinct levels in the graph, right? But it's wacky colors, like who chooses pale blue and purple to go with the graph? Usually we see kind of more authoritative colors than that. And we probably have people here from different fields, right? And different fields often have different expectations. My job here is to give you some general pointers that hopefully will cross different fields. We're going to talk about three areas that Richard Smith kind of pointed to, which is preparation, so how to prepare your presentation. We're going to talk about visual aids. We're going to talk about delivery. I'm going to spend a few minutes on the Q&A session, because the Q&A session tends to freak people out. And then at the end, I have some tips specifically for scientists, because last time I was here, all of my additional questions after I finished were all about science presentation. So I've done a little bit of extra research, and we will kind of go back on there. And hopefully at the end, we will actually have time for our own little Q&A session. I expect you to ask me tough questions, okay? Basically, I think about this as figuring out what you're going to say. And I actually like to encourage people to actually sit down and create a presentation. I think one of the biggest things that I know people in my field do, so communication, largely humanities, and maybe scientists, you can tell me if you do this as well, is that we take the paper that we've written and we get out a Sharpie and we start marking out sentences that we think we don't need, and then our presentation is us reading through our paper really fast so that we can squeeze it into 10 minutes. If you walk away with nothing else from this talk that I'm giving today, it's that really the worst thing you could do is do exactly what I just described, right? It's reading your paper, whether or not you've Sharpied out specific lines or not. If the goal of your paper ultimately is to kind of think about presenting your research, right, making an argument, you need to think about your presentation as having a different goal. Your presentation is ultimately an advertisement for your paper. So your goal is not just to kind of present your argument, but also to get your audience interested enough to go out and find more information. Right? So slightly different goals. In fact, this is from Paul Edwards, who is an associate prof at the University of Michigan, who basically tells us your presentation needs to do a couple of different things. One is to communicate your arguments and evidence, 2 is to persuade your audience that they are true, and hopefully you can do that with ease because I'm sure your arguments are all good arguments. 3 is to be interesting and entertaining, and I think we forget this, right? We tend to think of academic presentations as really dry and boring, and in fact many of them are. I'm not encouraging you to bring in a 3-ring circus, but I do think that we could stand to do, hi, come on in, we could stand to have more lively presentations. You will get more interest, I promise. I suggest that you sit down and actually craft a presentation, an entirely separate document from your original conference paper. And while you're crafting that presentation, you get to keep 3 things in mind. One is the sense that oral communication is distinctly different than written communication. The second thing that I want you to keep in mind here is that you need to know your audience. Audience adaptation is specifically important for oral presentations. And then finally, and I'm going to harp on this all day long, stay within your time limit. Stay within your time limit. It's really important. All right, so oral communication is certainly different than written communication. You might think about this in terms of how you are recasting your arguments or your data into an entirely different medium or a different language, right? Listeners only have one chance to hear you. Everything you say has to be understood at that moment. They can't flip back in time and hear you again. So it is absolutely essential that you make sure that you're talking clearly, that the sentences that you are using are not too complex. So what do you do when you're thinking about this? I have a couple of helpful hints. The first is KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. And boy, do we not like this. We like to make it complex, right? Because when we make things complex, we think we look smart. Actually, we often just look boring. So, KISS, keep it simple, stupid. I often suggest one way of doing this is by keeping your sentences short, bless you, declarative, right? Make them simple. You might focus on getting 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 key points across instead of attempting, if you have a very complex paper, instead of attempting to cover everything, choose what you think is most essential to cover or most interesting for your particular audience. Repeat those key insights. Repetition is great. So this is the old kind of adage, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. Keep at it, repeat it, that way your audience will remember it. And use examples to kind of clarify, to illustrate. Examples will help you in the long term get your audience to remember things. The second issue I wanted you to think about was your audience. This is a picture of, Martin Luther King Jr. And I have him up here because he is an expert at audience adaptation. Do we all know the I Have a Dream speech? When we teach this speech in public speaking, we often talk about what happened before he got to the stage. So it's a march on Washington, right? It is hot, it is sweaty, it is summertime, and he is one of the last speakers of the afternoon, and he knows it. He knows that he's looking out at a crowd of hundreds of thousands of people who are tired, who haven't had water, who are having trouble finding restrooms, right? This is an audience that has been listening to people drone on all day long. What he knows is that he needs to really perform an invigorating speech, and he does. And even before he gets up to the podium as the previous speaker is speaking, he is changing his speech. And we actually have the original notes for what he was going to say and his revised notes, and they're dramatically different because on the fly, he kind of makes revisions because he realizes otherwise his audience is out, right? He needs to bring them back in. So he's a great example. What do you need to think about? I expect that you're not going to be giving conference presentations in the hot sun in the middle of the afternoon, but you might still think about whether or not you have experts in your area, in your audience, what they might already know, right? If your audience is a mixed group, and job talks are often like this, do you want to focus on one group or a different group? Is your audience going to be tired? Are they a group that wants to be there? I face my undergraduate students every other day as a group that actually doesn't want to be there, right? And thus I do my best to say, yes, you do. You are excited to be here. I know it. I don't know if they agree with me, but you know, with all of this stuff in mind, then you can think about how to create a presentation that engages the audience members. If you know, for example, that you are on that 8 a.m. panel at your convention, and have we been on this panel? I've been on this panel. Not only will only 3 people show up, but those 3 people will be asleep, right? So at that point, you know, I need to give a presentation that is more exciting than I might give at 11 o'clock, right? I need to be kind of more enthusiastic. In terms of expertise, and I think this is a tricky area because one of the most difficult things is adapting your kind of talk to different levels of expertise. You might think about these kind of tips, right? If you're dealing with a mixed level audience, one way of getting around this is to kind of pitch the body of the presentation to the experts. So you give them some meaty details, but you pitch the forecast and the conclusion, so the kind of summaries at the beginning and the end, at the more general audience. So no matter what their knowledge level might be, everyone is going to walk away having a good sense of what your argument is. With that in mind, though, one of the biggest mistakes I think that anybody can make is to kind of dumb down their presentation, because nobody actually gets more offended than academic folk at thinking, do they think we're stupid? You know, do they think that I don't know that theory? So never, ever underestimate the kind of intelligence and the knowledge of your audience. I kind of like the idea of doing a little balance act. So speak to the people with all of the knowledge at the same time that you try to offer summaries that speak to everybody. And the third thing that I asked you to think about as you were kind of crafting or writing your presentation is that time limit thing. How many of you have seen presenters go beyond their time limit? A few, okay, everybody. And you have to wonder, why? Why have we all seen this? In fact, why have we all done it? Because, well, one, we're not practicing, right? So we don't actually know how much time it's going to take for us to give our presentation. But generally, I think I cannot emphasize actually enough how important it is to stay within the time limit. Again, as I was doing research for this presentation, it was the #1 thing that everybody mentioned. Nobody hates anything more than people who go over the time limit. There was one entire blog that was called Death to People Who Go Over the Time Limit. I mean, people get angry, in part because when you stay within your time limit, you're showing that you're professional, right? When you go over the time limit, you're being rude and you're taking up somebody else's time. So my own experience with this was a couple months ago where the first person on our panel, we each had about 10 minutes, and the first person took 25. And that left the rest of us frantically cutting down our papers to do our presentations in about 5 minutes. It was fun for nobody. These are my thoughts broadly about crafting the presentation. It doesn't quite get at how you're going to say it, right, or preparing for how you're going to talk about it. We will talk about delivery in half a second, but in the meantime, I want you to keep this in mind, which is practice. Practice. Practice with your friends. Practice with your family. Practice in front of a mirror. Practicing does a couple of things for you. It gets you more familiar with your presentation, right, so that you're comfortable with it. You're not going to stumble over certain words. It allows you to identify places where you can actually breathe or pause or take a breath. And I think most importantly, it allows you to kind of identify those moments that look really great on paper, but when you say them out loud, like your friend will go, huh? What? So you kind of have the time to change things that sound weird when you actually speak them, as opposed to when they're actually written on a paper. And of course, practice with your technology. We'll talk more about technology in a second here, but technology always fails, and it's best if you practice with it and at least know, or expect to know, kind of what it's going to do. Here's a really good bad visual aid, right? Is this the type of thing that you've seen where you're like, your audience walks away only knowing that there were numbers and 2 big green lines. That's it. They don't get any of the data. They don't actually have any idea of what this means. It's simply too small. It's too crowded. The question then becomes, what should you do? And I'm going to give you pointers, and you're going to say, well, yeah, they're simple things, but for whatever reason, we tend to do this instead of actually following the simple pointers. So first, though, why do we use visual aids? Why do we? Tell me. Emphasis? Yeah. Emphasis to explain something, right? Adding visual interest to your presentation. If you really think you're boring, then throw something splashy up on the screen. I'm just kidding. Visual aids, if they're done well, actually increase your credibility. If they're done poorly, they decrease your credibility. But if they're done well, you're showing people that you've put in the time, right? It's going to help increase kind of retention and comprehension by the audience if you can give them an example to latch onto. And it often helps your audience kind of visualize your argument. But despite all of these good things that visual aids do for us, usually they serve an entirely different purpose, and that purpose is distraction. We can talk about PowerPoint here in a second because I think PowerPoint often distracts, but the other main distraction that we face is handouts. Have you been in a presentation where you see handouts being passed around? A few people have. They're not so frequent anymore. What happens when we have handouts? In fact, the handout becomes the focus instead of the presenter, right? I have a handout for you, but I'm not giving it to you until I'm done. And that is the correct way. It makes you stay, for one thing, but it is a good way to use handouts. Handouts, you pass them around, people start shuffling, they're looking. If it's a multi-page thing, they're flipping ahead, right? Sometimes we need to use handouts. I would suggest that if you have to use them, you pass them out well before you're beginning to speak so that they have a chance to get all the way around the room before you start, right? And that you maybe consistently refer to kind of what page you're on. So if you look at the illustration on page 2, maybe then people will stick to page 2 instead of flipping forward to page 5 to see what you're going to talk about. One thing that is always distracting, and I would simply just put my foot down and say just don't do this, is passing around the one single copy of the thing. Like, here's the photo of my grandmother from 1963 or whatever. I'm going to pass it around. As it goes around, it's like you lose one row of people at a time, right? So don't do that. Maybe have that item up and say, you know, after the presentation, if you'd like to come look at it, I'd be happy to show it to you. So in order for visual aids not to become a distraction, well, dang it, there's that KISS thing again. So keep it simple. Most slides have way too much text. I think we should use slides to emphasize a point or two, or maybe a series of 5, as I've done here. Try to use large fonts, nothing smaller than 24, right? Because you want this to be easily read by the people in the very back of the room. Pictures, graphs, charts, and so forth are especially helpful if they are related to your topic, which goes right back to something we were talking about earlier. And it's always helpful to choose kind of light-colored backgrounds and dark text. If you actually go into the PowerPoint system and look at all of the different options they give you for what your slides could look like, I am surprised by how many have like red backgrounds and yellow text, you know. So this is a lived experience. She says she used red as a background and it actually didn't work out that well. So don't do that. Okay, these are simple points, but for some reason we don't seem to follow them. And I think we always tend to fall into the PowerPoint trap. I actually think in my experience that we use PowerPoint to torture each other. This is, you know, because we can't simply do the basics, right? Instead, we want to use every little bit of animation we possibly can, so don't do that, right? We want to try to be creative and use different colors on every page. We want to write out our entire presentation on PowerPoint slides. All of these things become a distraction, right? Instead of something that is emphasizing pretty simple points, if I had a Mickey Mouse dancing across here, you wouldn't be paying much attention to what I was trying to get at. Okay, a couple more hints about PowerPoint. It is almost impossible for people who use PowerPoint to not talk to the screen, right? We either talk to the screen in front of us, or even worse, we do this, at which case I'm turning my back on you. So I would simply remind you that the screen doesn't love you. The screen doesn't care about you. The people who care about you are your audience members, so you need to be talking to them. And the other thing that we run into with PowerPoint is that it often doesn't work. So no matter how fancy your technology is, right, I would be prepared to do without it. Always bring a backup of some sort. In fact, I got here a good 15 minutes early because I know this happens to us. It took us almost 12 minutes to log on to the computer, right? So technology is really problematic. My own personal story here, when I got the job at A&M, this was about 4 years ago, my interview was in winter and there was an ice storm. So my job talk, which should have taken place in a room like this with technology, ended up being at the Reveille Inn dining room. The Reveille Inn is a bed and breakfast with no technology. But I made it through. You see me standing here today because I was prepared to give my talk no matter what happened. How do we practice good delivery? My first thing here is get used to it, because this is what we do, right? We're academics. We have to do this. It's part of our kind of deal that we make when we enter into this world. Me worry? This is you. You're not worried, right? I would suggest right off the bat that you develop a speaking style that is not memorized and it's not impromptu. I think memorizing is pretty unlikely for a full kind of length conference presentation, but at the same time, you certainly don't want to be making it up as you go along. Usually we have our presentations written down in some way, whether it's on a paper like I do or on little note cards. So what I would kind of urge you to do is to know your presentation well enough that you can have it in front of you and you can look at it every once in a while, pick up a few sentences, glance back down, pick up another few sentences, so that you're continuously making eye contact. And we call this extemporaneous speaking in the public speaking world. Yep.
Do you recommend that we actually write down everything that we're going to say, or just write down bullet points?
I think it's up to you. For some people, bullet points work really well. And especially if you're practicing it, you know what those bullet points signify, right? So you can have a very short kind of bulleted thing and know, oh, these are the sentences that are going to go along with the bullet points. My preference, I usually have my entire presentation written out, but if you've been watching me, like, I'm glancing up and down pretty consistently so that I know this presentation, but I kind of like having it here in case I get lost. I think it's up to you, right? So you have to kind of grapple with what works best for you, which means, again, as you get more experience with this, you're going to figure out what does work. Extemporaneous speaking, like I'm talking about, which helps you not read your presentation, also helps you with a couple of other things. One is that you get to make eye contact with your audience members. Eye contact basically tells your audience that you're engaged with them, that you care, right? You are interacting with them. And speaking of that audience, as you're making eye contact with them, you might be paying attention to what they're doing. This is a great chance for you to figure out where your audience is, right? Are they playing on their iPhones? Y'all are a really attentive audience, I have to say, a very attentive audience. My undergraduates are on their computers, they're playing with their iPhones. You know, I've been at presentations where people are flipping through the conference book to figure out where they're going next. If you're seeing folks who are distracted, it's time to step your performance up, right? So you need to re-engage your audience in some way. Tell a small joke, make them laugh, do something, right? Get louder. Speaking of humor, does it work? What do you think? Have you seen humor in some of these academic presentations? Yeah, little bits, right? Outrageous humor, right? Bringing in the circus, maybe not a good idea, but often it really does help. So small, non-offensive jokes, please double check those jokes that you think might be offensive, or just don't tell them at all. Small, non-offensive jokes get your audience interested in what you're going to say. You really are a presenter or a performer here, right? So think about it as a performance. I think there are definitely times when humor is not appropriate, so be aware of those times as well. One place where it is consistently appropriate is when you make a mistake. So the joke, for example, that I made earlier when I missed my slide and said, oh, you shouldn't do this, that's a great example, right, of kind of laughing at a mistake instead of apologizing. Once you apologize, then we're only focused on your mistake. You know, it's not that big of a deal. We all make mistakes, so you just move on. The other way to get their attention is by vocal variety. You mentioned monotones. Speaking in monotones, this is sleep-inducing. You cannot put anybody to sleep faster if you speak like this all the time. So vary your pitch, vary your rate, insert a couple pauses, vary your volume. You become a more interesting speaker altogether. Here's one of the things that I struggle with, and it's this next thing, hand movement. Most of what you read in terms of making good presentations say minimize your hand movement, place your hands on your podium, you know, keep your hands down. I love speaking with my hands, so this is something that I struggle with still. The one thing I can tell you is that the worst thing you can do with your hands is put them in your pockets. drives me crazy. Don't do it. It kind of signals that you're so uncomfortable and you're putting them in your pockets. It's a bit informal, right? You're really uncertain about what to do with them. Just rest them somewhere, just relax. I have stand up here, although I'm kind of iffy on this. I think standing up makes sure that people can see you, right? So if I were sitting, I think some people would have difficulty seeing me. When you stand, you generally have more authority. But if you're in a conference presentation kind of moment where every presenter before you has been sitting down, I would suggest you sit down too. So follow whatever the norm is. Begin with an introduction. Hey, howdy, how you doing? Maybe your name. Depending on how much information your chair has given about you, you may want to insert a little information about yourself. And also always end with a thank you. I think it's a nice way to kind of end a presentation. The bottom line here, practice, 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 right? It will make you feel more comfortable with all of this. Next up, in my own presentation here, because we've talked now about preparing, we've talked about visual aids, we've talked about delivery, is to talk about the Q&A session. Does the Q&A session worry you? Yeah. Yes. Well, if you have a red PowerPoint presentation, no. Why does it worry you?
I think maybe because you may not be able to answer the
Because you may not be able to answer the question, right? And I think that's our main worry most of the time. So, okay. I think the bottom line is you need to expect questions that are going to floor you, questions that you just aren't going to know the answer to. What you really want, though, are these good, tough, critical questions. So I'm asking you to reframe this in your mind. Instead of being scared of those tough questions, think, yes, they've offered me a tough question, right? Because what they're doing is asking you to think critically about your own work. And what that shows is that they've been listening, right? That they find it interesting, that they actually have questions about it. Because the opposite of this is silence. And have we been to those presentations? There's nothing more uncomfortable than silence after a presentation. So you want to do everything you can do to avoid that by giving an interesting presentation, something that's going to attract the interest of your audience. I also, these are just kind of little tips, and I know I have a problem with this as well. Try not to get defensive when you're answering questions. I think we interpret these questions as attacks on us, right? When actually they're questions about our ideas. And if we think about it, this is the way that knowledge is created, that we question, we tweak, we think about it. So they're not attacking you necessarily. What they're asking for is clarification or expansion upon your ideas, and that's an important distinction to make. What if you don't know the answer? Do you run away? Run away! No. No, it's actually okay to not know the answer. You can simply say, this was a really good question. It deserves more thought. Could we meet at a separate time? Could we talk later? So praise the question, praise the questioner, and then say, let's talk more. If you don't understand a question, and this is pretty frequent actually in Q&A sessions, because people who are asking questions ask, I swear, we just want you all to do research like we would do research. So these questions start with, now in my field, I would have done, right? Blah, blah, blah. Now, how would you do it if you were me, right? If you don't understand quite what they're getting at, ask them to rephrase it. They should be more than happy to do so. Some of these questions are off the wall, and you just got to bounce them back and say, no, 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 no. Tell me again what you mean. And again, what to do if you don't know the answer. Praise the question, right? Ask the questioner to discuss the issue with you individually. Remember that this really isn't the worst thing in the world. There are smart ways to say, I don't know, right? And those smart ways include, we should talk about this more, rather than running away. In the humanities, I can tell you right off the bat that the #1 problem we have is that we read our papers. If you go to any conference, if you go to MLA, if you go to the National Communication Association conference, which I go to every year, we read our papers. It is tedious, it is boring. I don't know why we still do it. I'm asking you not to. Scientists or people who are outside of the humanities have a slightly different set of issues. although not entirely different. So I have kind of 4 common mistakes or common problems that we can think about. But again, these are things that are going to sound familiar because we've already discussed the basics. One of them is that scientists or engineers or whatever often think that the data speak for themselves, right? So I'm just going to throw the stuff out there. Here are my equations. Here are my findings, and it's going to speak for itself. I don't actually need to make arguments about it or whatnot. I would ask that you keep in mind, right, that how you present your material is going to influence how that material is received. So thinking carefully about what you're placing emphasis on, what kind of background you give in terms of your theories and so forth becomes really important. Common mistake number 2 actually is related to the first, forgetting about the audience because your data is so great. This is amazing stuff. You all should be really impressed by this. I'm not even going to think about you. Keep in mind that communication is a 2 or 3 or 4-way track, right? So I'm sending messages, you're receiving them, but I'm picking up on what you're looking at me. You're like, oh, really? No. I'm responding to the kind of messages that you're sending back to me as well. So you need to kind of keep yourself in the audience's position at all times. You might ask yourself some of the following questions. What other scientists might be interested or what other areas might be interested. These are for kind of talks of all lengths, but for longer or more diverse talks. And I think really this goes for just about anybody, right? How can I generate excitement in my subject in someone without knowledge, any knowledge in the field? Or is there a research or teaching anecdote that I can use to bring emphasis, to bring interest, maybe even a little humor? It's tough. All right, common mistake number 3, speaking in scientific journalese. Humanities folks, do I have English folks or, but yes, what's our equivalent to scientific journalese?
Theory talk.
Yeah, it's theory talk. It's high theory talk. Now my presentation on Derrida, I mean, and you can't, we can read it, right? But it's hard to dissect when you're hearing it. The solution here is to translate written science into spoken science. So we're back to that difference between kind of written communication and oral communication, knowing that a well-prepared presentation should be simple, direct, using active words, and that you're keeping technical language as uncomplicated as possible, again, without dumbing down your presentation. And that's the tough line to walk, but you should at least try to negotiate it. Poor visual aids is another problem, and this seems to be specifically for kind of scientific or technical disciplines, in part because humanities folks just don't use visual aids, right? So generally, any conference presentation I give does not have any visual aids whatsoever, which means that all of the focus really is on me. But when you do have graphs or charts or whatnot, you need to make sure that they don't look like the visual aid that I showed you a few minutes ago, which was cluttered with numbers. I've actually been citing here a specific document, which is this piece called Scientifically Speaking, and it's written by the Oceanography Society, and it is a great pamphlet, and it is available online. And not only does it talk about presentations, but it also talks about poster presentations. And poster presentations, I think, are probably more important in the kind of world of science than they are, again, in the world of humanities. So if you're interested in that, I would highly suggest you check out the website, which will be on the handout that I will give you at the end of my presentation. So how am I doing? Not bad, not bad. All right. Yay, thank you. I have a little time for questions. Yes. So the question is, what do you do when people are asking questions in the middle of your presentation? I think you have a couple of ways to go about it. You can, go with the flow and try to answer those questions. Or you could simply say, I'm going to make a note of that, but I'm going to come back at the end of my presentation if we have time during Q&A, right? Because your goal is ultimately, well, A, to finish your presentation and do it well, but B, not offend your audience, right? So it's actually a nice thing to say that. That's a great question. Can I pick that up in a minute? And my bet is that once you say that, the other people in the audience who are wanting to ask questions will get the hint, right? Or they should. So this question broadly was like, can you clarify what you're asking us to do in terms of writing up an actual presentation versus basing it on what your conference paper is. And he said, but you actually have a document in front of you. And I'm saying, yes, yes, indeed I have. I can actually show you the longer version of this document. This is my, these are my presentation notes, and I have a kind of much longer document about giving good presentations that I've kind of used. I've kind of crafted this presentation from. So indeed, like what I described to you is exactly what I do when I'm presenting, which is I look at my conference paper and I start writing. Often you can cut and paste, right? But I come up with an entirely separate document that does not mirror entirely my original paper. It is more work, right? And I think that is part of the reason why we do give bad presentations, because we have limited time, right? So we're on the airplane on the way to the conference with our paper going, whoop, 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 can't say this. I have 5 minutes, you know. I know people who are also writing their paper on the way to the conference on the airplane. So I do know, right, don't do that, right? Write it ahead of time, a couple days at least. I do know that it's tough to kind of squeak out the time to do it, but it does make a difference. Do you want to know how I practice specifically?
I mean, because I noticed that you've written down all your presentation notes.
Did I do a good job making eye contact, though? Yeah, see, I did. I can tell you that let's see, this is a presentation I'm familiar with because I've given parts of it before in various places. So before coming here, I practiced it in full 2 times, once last night and once again this morning. And I probably would have done it more if I had been more unfamiliar with it, right? But 2 full run-throughs, so, you know, about 40 minutes each. And I would sit down with a computer to my side. I actually sat, I didn't stand. I sat with the computer to my side so I could press the button for the PowerPoint because I was running the PowerPoint as I went through it. So that's how I do it. I mean, I really actually do. I practice what I preach. I really do practice, yep.
What is your opinion? What's your advice?
Well, my advice first would be to really think about practicing, right? Because I think practicing is going to be the thing that makes you most comfortable with speaking English if it's your second language. I would also think in that case that it might be helpful to practice in front of other people. And I know, like, I can practice alone in my office, but it might be useful to practice in front of other people. But here's my third point. I actually wouldn't worry about it too much. I mean, the bottom line is that we are all in fields that are becoming increasingly international, and I think if you are speaking as you are speaking, the audience will work with you to understand you. So you make your best effort, right, and you put your best foot forward. I think the audience also has a kind of duty and a responsibility as an active audience to understand you. Things that you might find interesting, some for scientific presentations or generally more technical presentations, others for humanities-based presentations, and then a few general stuff about conferences, attendance, you know, that kind of good stuff. And I hope you all have a fantastic, wonderful Friday afternoon. Thank you.